Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. We're diving into a topic today that's, it's kind of a heavy one. We're talking about the assassination of President John F. Kennedy.
Yeah, a moment that I think really just changed America, right?
Absolutely. And, we've had a lot of listeners asking us to take a closer look at Mark Lane's rush to judgment.
Yeah.
It came out, what, like a year after the assassination?
Yeah, 1964. So really right on the heels of the Warren Commission report.
And it really, shook things up. I mean, here was this book directly challenging the official narrative, saying Lee Harvey Oswald might not have acted alone.
Exactly. Lane was one of the first to really lay out a comprehensive counterargument. And he did it by, meticulously examining the evidence and highlighting all these discrepancies and inconsistencies that the Warren Commission, well, seemed to just kind of gloss over.
So for our listeners who maybe haven't read the book, what would you say is the most compelling part of Lane's argument?
Well, for me, it's how he uses witness testimonies. He brings in all these people who saw things that contradict the idea that all the shots came from the Texas school book depository.
Okay, yeah. Let's talk about some of those witnesses. I mean, you've got Jean Hill, right? The woman who claimed she saw a man running away from the depository right after the shots.
Exactly. And that goes directly against the whole idea that Oswald was just sitting up there in that sixth-floor window all alone.
Right. And it's not just her. You have Lee Bowers Jr., the railroad towerman, had a clear view of the grassy knoll, and he testified about seeing some shady stuff going on there before the shooting.
Oh, yeah, Bowers. He's a key witness. And then, of course, there's S.M. Holland. He actually claimed he saw a puff of smoke on the grassy knoll, not coming from the book depository at all.
So already we're talking about multiple witnesses placing the origin of the shots in a totally different location than where Oswald supposedly was.
Exactly. And then you've got all the other witnesses, and some of them were even Secret Service agents and Dallas police officers who said they heard shots coming from the direction of the grassy knoll.
Right. And when you've got that many people saying the same thing, it starts to make you wonder if the Warren Commission was maybe picking and choosing which testimonies to believe, or at least which ones to emphasize.
Oh, Lane definitely argues that they were. He says they selectively used evidence to fit their narrative. And he didn't just stop there. He went on to take on one of the most controversial parts of the whole Warren report.
You're talking about the magic bullet theory, right?
That's the one.
Okay, so for our listeners who might not be familiar with this, the Warren Commission basically said that one single bullet caused all the wounds to both President Kennedy and Governor Connally.
Yeah, it was Commission Exhibit 399, right. But, well, Lane had a field day with that theory.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, it does sound pretty far-fetched.
Well, it is. I mean, this bullet supposedly went through two people, hit bones, caused all these different wounds, and then came out pretty much unscathed. It's no wonder people called it the magic bullet.
It really does seem kind of impossible, doesn't it?
Well, Lane certainly thought so. And that's not all. He also raised some big questions about how they handled the bullet. Like, the chain of custody wasn't clear. You'd think for such a critical piece of evidence, they'd be super careful about documenting where it was found, who handled it, all that.
So it's not just the bullet's path that's questionable, but also the possibility that the evidence itself was maybe mishandled, or even tampered with.
Right. And then Lane takes a look at the rifle. The one they say Oswald used?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
He even scrutinizes that famous photo of Oswald holding the rifle, the one in his backyard.
Yep, that one. He points out things about the lighting and shadows, even the composition of the picture that make it look like it might have been staged.
So that image, which is so iconic and powerful, might not even be genuine.
Well, that's what Lane suggests. And he doesn't stop there. He also gets into the ammunition.
The ammunition?
Yeah, the type of bullets used. He argues that the way the commission presented that information was, well, pretty misleading. And again, it just raises more questions about whether they were trying to, push a certain narrative.
Okay, so we've got conflicting witness accounts, a magic bullet that might not be so magical, a possibly staged photo, and confusing info about the ammunition. It's starting to feel like the official story's got some holes in it, huh?
Yeah, that's exactly what Lane was going for. But we're just scratching the surface here.
Really? There's more.
Oh, yeah. There's still so much to dig into. Like, what about Oswald's aliases? And that whole controversy surrounding the paraffin test? The one that was supposed to show if he'd recently fired a gun.
Wow. Lane really went deep with this.
He did. And that's why rush to judgment is still so relevant. I mean, it really makes you think about how we interpret history and how important it is to question what we're told.
That's for sure. Okay, well, I'm definitely ready to hear more.
let's do it. You know, when you read Rush to Judgment, there's one thing that always sticks with me.
Hmm.
It's how Lane handles the whole Jack Ruby thing.
Ah, yeah, the guy who shot Oswald.
Right. He doesn't just treat him as like some side character, some footnote.
Yeah.
He really tries to understand Ruby, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like a real person, his past, his connections, what was going on with him leading up to that day.
So it's not just about what Ruby did, but also why he might have done it.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes Lane's approach so interesting. He takes these figures who seem, kind of two-dimensional and gives them depth.
So instead of this cold-blooded killer silencing Oswald, we see a more complex figure.
Right.
A guy with his own motivations, maybe even his own demons.
Right, and that challenges the whole lone wolf narrative that the Warren Commission put forward.
Because they pretty much said, didn't they, that Ruby was just driven by grief, wanting to spare Jackie Kennedy from a trial.
Yeah, that was the official line.
But Lane seems to suggest something else is going on.
He does, and it gets, well, a little unsettling. He explores the possibility that Ruby was part of something bigger. Maybe preventing Oswald from talking, from revealing something that could have, blown the whole case open.
So Ruby becomes less a villain and more of a pawn, a tragic figure caught up in something he couldn't control.
It's a chilling thought, right?
It really is. And Lane doesn't come right out and say, this is what happened, but he raises enough questions that you can't help but wonder.
And I think that's what makes Rush to Judgment so powerful even today.
It's not about him telling us what to believe.
It's about giving us the information, the contradictions, and then letting us decide.
He's basically saying, here's what I found, now you figure it out.
Right. And this approach, it goes beyond just Ruby. It extends to Lane's whole critique of the Warren Commission.
Because he's not just saying they got things wrong.
He's questioning their methods, their motives. He even suggests they were more interested in protecting public confidence than uncovering the truth.
So it's like they chose the narrative that would keep things calm, even if it wasn't the whole story.
Right. And Lane argues that because the commission was made up of these prominent figures, they felt this pressure to present a conclusion that wouldn't, further rock the boat.
It's almost as if they thought the truth might be too much for people to handle right now.
Which raises some pretty big questions about how much we can trust institutions, especially when it comes to something as huge as a presidential assassination.
Exactly. And that's the kind of thinking that Lane's work encourages.
It's not just about different versions of events.
It's about examining how power works, how narratives get shaped, how easily the truth can be hidden.
And that's so relevant today. We're bombarded with information from all sides. Being able to think critically, to question the official story, is more important than ever.
Lane gives us a blueprint for how to do that. To pay attention, to look for inconsistencies, to consider other explanations, even if they make us uncomfortable.
It's about saying, don't just take things at face value. Do your own research. Think for yourself.
And that applies to everything, right? Politics, current events, even our own lives.
It's about always being curious, always digging a little deeper.
Speaking of digging deeper, Lane doesn't shy away from some of the more disturbing aspects of the case, like the whole issue of suppressed evidence.
Oh yeah, that's a big one.
And we're not just talking about things getting lost.
Right, we're talking about evidence being deliberately destroyed.
He brings up the missing X-rays and photographs from Kennedy's autopsy. I mean, those could have been crucial for understanding the bullet trajectories, the number of shots fired.
Gone. And then there's the destruction of Oswald's post office box application.
Which could have shed light on his activities, potential connections, who knows.
But it's gone.
It really makes you wonder, if they were trying to be transparent, why destroy evidence?
That's the question that hangs over the whole case, isn't it? Were they really after the truth? Or were they protecting something else?
It's like they thought it was better to bury certain information than let it come out and cause chaos or doubt.
But by doing that, they created more suspicion, fueling the conspiracy theories that still exist today.
This is a weird paradox, isn't it? Trying to control the narrative can end up backfiring.
And that's part of Lane's legacy. He showed us that questioning the official story isn't about being a conspiracy theorist. It's about being an informed citizen.
About demanding transparency. About never giving up on the search for truth.
And that message resonates now more than ever.
We've covered a lot of ground today, but there's one more crucial piece of Lane's argument we need to address.
Definitely. We can't wrap up this deep dive without talking about it.
So we've talked about the evidence, the witnesses, even the Warren Commission itself. But there's this bigger question looming, isn't there?
The why.
Yeah. Like, even if we say, okay, maybe Oswald did pull the trigger, The Warren Commission's explanation for why he did it, it always seemed, I don't
A
know.
little thin.
Yeah, exactly. A disgruntled loner with communist sympathies. It never quite felt like enough to explain assassinating the president. Did Lane offer any insight into that?
He did, and this is where it gets really interesting. Lane argued that by focusing so much on Oswald as this lone gunman, the commission missed the chance to explore deeper motives.
Motives that might point to something more complicated than just one guy acting alone.
Exactly. Think about it, if their explanation for Oswald doesn't really hold up, well, that opens up a whole lot of other possibilities.
So is he saying there was a conspiracy?
He doesn't say that outright, but he lays out enough alternative interpretations of the evidence that you can't help but wonder.
It's like he's saying, here are the pieces of the puzzle, now you try to put them together.
Right. He's asking us to think critically and, consider the possibility that maybe there's more to the story.
And that's what makes Rush to Judgment so powerful, even after all these years.
It's not about giving us the answers. It's about making us ask the right questions.
So for someone listening who's, maybe hearing all this for the first time, what would you say is the biggest takeaway from Lane's book? Why should this matter to them today?
I think the most important thing is the message about critical thinking. Lane's book is a reminder to never just blindly accept what you're told, especially when it comes to events as big and as impactful as the JFK assassination.
It's like he's saying those in power don't always have our best interests at heart, and that sometimes the truth is a lot more messy and complicated than we might like to believe.
Right. We need to be informed, we need to be skeptical, and we need to question the information we're given, even when it comes from people who seem like they should know what they're talking about.
Lane's work really shows us that the search for truth, it's not a passive thing. We can't just sit back and wait for the answers to be handed to us. We have to be active participants.
We need to dig deeper, look at the evidence ourselves, and come to our own conclusions. And I think it's fitting to leave our listeners with one final thought-provoking question. Lane's book focuses on the who of the assassination.
But what about the why?
Even if we take the Warren Commission's findings at face value, their explanation for Oswald's motive is still pretty weak.
So were there other reasons behind JFK's death? Deeper reasons that go beyond just one man acting alone? That's a question we all have to wrestle with as we think about the legacy of the assassination and the ongoing search for the truth.
We encourage you to check out Rush to Judgment for yourselves, explore the evidence, and come to your own conclusions about this pivotal moment in history.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Mark Lane's Rush to Judgment. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep searching for the truth.